She was the kind of woman who didn't need to prove anything, until I told her she was the smartest person in the room. She smiled, leaned close, and whispered, "Stay after. I'll prove it." That was the moment everything between us changed. The office after hours had a silence that wasn't empty, it listened. The hum of the air conditioning, the faint clicking of her pen, the soft rustle of papers, everything seemed to move around her rhythm. The city lights outside painted her silhouette in soft gold, and for the first time, I realized how much the world around her bent quietly to her presence. She stood by the tall windows, reviewing the final report of the quarter. Her focus was absolute, sharp, unwavering. There was a kind of grace in how she carried control, as if confidence was simply the way she breathed. To most people, she was the CEO, measured, polished, unreachable. But that night, there was something different. The way her shoulders sagged slightly when she thought no one was watching. The way she exhaled softly after each page, like the weight of perfection was heavier than anyone imagined. I lingered near the edge of her desk, file in hand. I'd stayed late, pretending it was about finishing the project, but in truth, I didn't want to leave while she was still there. She glanced up, meeting my eyes briefly. Even that single look carried authority, but not distance. "You should have gone home hours ago," she said, her tone light but her gaze lingering. I smiled. "Figured I'd finish this tonight. Wanted it ready before you checked it in the morning." She tilted her head, curious now, and extended her hand for the papers. Our fingers brushed, barely a second, but the contact left a quiet echo in my pulse. Her hands were cool from the air conditioning, her nails short and neat, her touch firm but unassuming. She scanned the report quickly, her expression changing when she caught something. "You caught an error in the projections," she said, her tone thoughtful. "Even I missed that." I shrugged, pretending it was nothing. "Just luck, maybe." She looked up then, really looked. Her eyes had that kind of clarity that could read a person beyond their words. "Not luck," she said quietly. "You're sharper than you let on." Something about the way she said it, half praise, half observation, made my chest tighten. I tried to respond casually, but the words came out softer than I intended. "You're the smart one here. I just learn by watching you." It was meant as a light compliment. But when I said it, the air changed, something invisible shifted between us. Her lips curved into a subtle, knowing smile. She stepped closer, just a fraction, enough for the faint scent of her perfume, something floral with a hint of cedar, to fill the air between us. "Is that so?" she whispered. And then, with the smallest tilt of her head, she said the words that would linger in me for weeks, "Stay after. I'll prove it." She turned back to her desk as if nothing had happened, pen tapping lightly against the papers. But my world had gone still. The office lights dimmed automatically at 9, and in that half-shadow, I saw her silhouette framed against the city skyline, composed, elegant, unknowingly magnetic. That night, for the first time, I didn't see her as the CEO. I saw her as a woman, one who had just changed everything without even trying. The building had its own kind of heartbeat after everyone left, soft echoes in the hallway, the distant hum of elevators resting between floors, the rhythmic drip of rain against the windowpanes. It was nearly 10 when I realized we were the only two people left on the entire floor. The air felt heavier, not with exhaustion, but with awareness. She sat at her desk, sleeves rolled up, glasses perched lightly on her nose, a version of her the daytime world never got to see. The perfection that defined her during board meetings had softened into something human, quietly striking. I watched her concentrate on a spreadsheet, the glow of the monitor tracing a faint light along her cheekbones. Every click of her mouse sounded like punctuation in a sentence she wasn't speaking aloud. When she noticed me still standing by the door, she leaned back slightly, an eyebrow raised. "You're still here," she said. It wasn't a question, more like an acknowledgement that I hadn't left even though I should have. "You said you'd prove something," I answered, a small, nervous smile tugging at my lips. She studied me for a second, expression unreadable, then motioned for me to come closer. Sit, she said softly. If you're going to learn, you might as well pay attention properly. I sat beside her, close enough to see the faint reflection of city lights in her eyes. She began explaining a section of the report I had misinterpreted earlier, something about financial trends and predictive models. Her tone was patient, but what caught me wasn't the lesson itself. It was her voice, steady, low, with a rhythm that felt like calm rain. Every so often, she'd glance at me to check if I understood. The warmth in her gaze made it hard to focus on anything else. "You're following?" she asked quietly, her shoulder brushing mine as she leaned forward to point at the screen. "Trying to," I murmured, though my attention had long drifted to her nearness, the faint scent of her perfume, the way a single strand of hair had fallen loose and brushed her neck. She noticed my silence and smiled, not teasingly, but knowingly. "You're not distracted by the numbers, are you?" I swallowed, unsure what to say. The question lingered between us, playful but intimate. She reached for the pen in my hand, her fingers grazing mine, a light, deliberate touch that made every nerve wake. "Focus," she said softly, but her tone carried warmth, not reprimand. I nodded, though the pulse in my chest didn't listen. When she finally leaned back, satisfied with whatever point she'd proven, she looked at me with a quiet amusement. "See? Smart isn't about who's right," she said. "It's about who's willing to understand." The words weren't just about work anymore, and she knew it. Outside, thunder rolled faintly through the night. Inside, the distance between us felt almost invisible. And though she said nothing more, the silence spoke with its own electricity. That night, I realized learning from her had nothing to do with reports, and everything to do with restraint. The following days passed with the illusion of normalcy, meetings, reports, schedules, polite nods in the hallway. But beneath all of it, something had shifted. The air between us wasn't the same. Every conversation carried an undercurrent, every glance lingered a little longer than it should have. In meetings, she'd speak with her usual poise, her tone calm and precise, yet sometimes her gaze would catch mine mid-sentence. Just for a second. Just long enough to remind me of that night when she said, "Stay after." Those two words had carved a space between us that neither of us dared to name. I told myself it was in my head, a fleeting moment blown out of proportion. But then, there were the small things. The way her tone softened when she addressed me. The way she lingered after everyone else had left a conference room. The way she'd ask, "You've been quiet lately," in a voice that felt less like a question and more like concern. One evening, I brought a proposal to her office. The city outside was painted in shades of silver and blue, the skyline blurred by mist. She was sitting near the window, her expression unreadable, hands clasped loosely on her lap. She didn't look up when I entered. "You've been distracted," she said quietly. I froze for a moment, unsure if she was talking about work or something else. "I guess I've just been thinking a lot." "About?" Her tone was even, but her eyes, when she finally met mine, were too direct to hide behind professionalism. I exhaled. "About where I stand." That made her pause. She set aside the file she'd been holding, folding her arms gently, as if bracing for an answer she wasn't sure she wanted. "And where do you think you stand?" My throat felt dry. The truth came out quieter than I intended. "Somewhere between what's right, and what feels real." Her gaze softened, not with pity, but with understanding. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a small sigh, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes tracing mine. "You know," she said, "I've spent years keeping everything in its proper place, emotions, people, expectations. But lately," she stopped, her voice trailing off into the hum of the city outside. "Lately what?" I asked. "Lately, I don't know where that line is anymore." The room went still. There was no music, no movement, just the quiet realization that we were standing at the edge of something we couldn't define. I wanted to reach for her, to bridge the space between us. But all I did was stand there, caught between duty and desire, logic and longing. She turned back to the window, her reflection merging with the lights outside. "Don't cross that line," she said softly. I nodded, but in my heart, I already had. That Friday evening, the sky broke open. Rain poured against the glass like it had been waiting weeks to fall. The office had emptied early, but her light still burned in the corner office, a soft, golden glow cutting through the storm. I should have gone home. I knew it. But something in me needed to see her, even if just for a moment, even if only to prove to myself that nothing had changed, even though everything had. I stood at her door, watching her from a distance. She wasn't working. She was just staring outside, one hand resting against the windowpane. The city lights blurred through the rain, and her reflection looked fragile, like someone quietly carrying 1,000 unspoken thoughts. When she noticed me, she didn't act surprised. "You never learned how to leave on time," she murmured. "Neither did you," I replied. She turned slightly, offering a faint, tired smile. "Someone has to keep this place running." I walked closer, the quiet tap of my shoes filling the space. "You don't have to keep everything together all the time." For a moment, her eyes flickered, that rare crack in her composed exterior. "If I don't," she said softly, "it all falls apart." The vulnerability in her voice made my chest tighten. The woman everyone saw, confident, decisive, untouchable, wasn't standing in front of me now. This was someone else. Someone human. Someone who'd built her strength out of necessity, not ease. "You don't have to prove anything," I said gently. She looked at me then, really looked, and something in her expression shifted. "That's the problem," she whispered. "I'm tired of proving things to everyone, except the people who actually see me." The rain outside grew louder, almost protective, like it wanted to drown out everything that didn't matter. She stepped closer, slow, deliberate, until there was barely a breath between us. The faint warmth of her skin brushed against mine, subtle but enough to feel the current between us come alive. "I don't like being misunderstood," she said, voice trembling slightly. "People think I don't feel things deeply. But I do. Maybe too deeply." The honesty in her tone left no room for pretense. I didn't respond with words, I just stood there, close enough that the quiet space between us began to feel sacred. Her hand brushed mine, feather-light, hesitant, and yet the world seemed to stop at that touch. Our eyes met, and in that stillness, everything we hadn't said came rushing in, the late nights, the glances, the restraint, the ache. "Stay," she whispered again. But this time, it wasn't a challenge. It wasn't about lessons or pride or control. It was a confession. And I did. The storm outside raged on, but inside, time held its breath, just for us. The rain softened sometime past midnight, but neither of us moved. Her office had turned into its own world, dim lights, the faint scent of coffee cooling on her desk, and the rhythmic hum of rain fading into quiet. She sat on the couch near the window now, her heels off, her hair loosened slightly, no longer the image of authority everyone bowed to. Just a woman who looked like she hadn't allowed herself to rest in years. I sat across from her, still trying to process what had happened, her touch, her voice, the trembling in her words when she'd said, "Stay." The distance between us wasn't much, but it felt loaded with meaning. Every second of silence carried its own heartbeat. She finally spoke, her tone calm but fragile. "Do you ever get tired of pretending you're fine?" I hesitated. "Every day." Her eyes lifted to mine, soft yet searching. "Then you understand me better than most." I wanted to say something comforting, something that wouldn't sound foolish next to the weight of her honesty. Instead, I said the truth. "You don't have to be strong right now." She gave a faint smile, like she wanted to believe me but didn't know how. "People expect strength from me. It's easier to wear it than to explain the cracks." I shifted closer, resting my elbows on my knees, trying to find the right balance between closeness and respect. You don't need to explain the cracks, I said quietly. They're what make you real. For a moment, she just looked at me, the kind of look that feels like someone is reading the part of you you've never spoken aloud. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed her hand on mine. Her palm was warm, her touch steady, but there was something trembling beneath it, something human. You make me feel seen, she whispered. The simplicity of it hit harder than anything else. No one had said it with that kind of vulnerability before, not her, not like this. I turned my hand over, fingers brushing hers gently, holding that connection just enough to let her know it mattered. You make me want to be better, I said. She exhaled softly, part relief, part surrender. The world outside had gone quiet, even the rain seemed to listen. Neither of us moved. There was no rush, no sudden pull, just stillness. The kind of stillness that felt like truth. Her thumb traced a slow, thoughtful line across my skin, and it wasn't romantic or planned. It was grounding, the touch of someone finally allowing herself to feel without apology. When our eyes met again, there was no tension left, no power dynamic, no fear. Just two people, stripped of their titles, meeting in the middle of a long, quiet night. For the first time, I didn't see her as the CEO. I saw her as the woman who had finally stopped pretending she didn't need to be understood. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the world washed and still. The first hints of dawn pressed softly through the blinds, painting her office in muted gold. The city was waking up, but inside, time still felt suspended, quiet, fragile, holding its breath around us. We hadn't moved much since the night before. She sat beside me on the couch now, one leg tucked under the other, her coffee gone cold on the table. The tiredness in her eyes didn't dull her presence, if anything, it made her more beautiful. Real, unguarded. When the sun touched her face, she blinked against the light, then turned to me with a faint, sleepy smile. You stayed. I nodded. You asked me to. She studied me for a moment, her gaze steady but softer than I'd ever seen it. I didn't mean to make things complicated, she said quietly. You didn't, I replied. You just made them honest. She looked away then, as if my words were too much to meet head-on. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers tracing invisible lines against her skin, a small, nervous habit I'd never seen before. You know this can't be more than it is, she said, her tone gentle but edged with sadness. I know, I whispered. But that doesn't make it meaningless. Her eyes lifted again, searching, almost grateful. You always surprise me, she said softly. I smiled faintly. You said I was sharper than I let on. That drew a quiet laugh from her, the kind of laugh that breaks tension without breaking the moment. Maybe I did, she said, leaning back slightly. And maybe you've proved it. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't feel empty anymore. She reached for her blazer, draping it over her shoulders, the return of the composed, graceful version of her the world knew so well. Yet something about her felt changed, like she'd folded the night's honesty into herself, quietly, privately. When she stood, I did too. She adjusted her sleeve, glanced up at me, and said in that calm, steady tone I'd come to know, "Thank you, for staying." You don't need to thank me. I do, she said. You saw me. Not everyone gets to do that. The morning light caught her hair as she turned toward her desk. She was once again the CEO, composed, deliberate, untouchable. But as I left her office, I realized something had shifted forever. We hadn't confessed love, hadn't made promises, hadn't said words that would change everything, but the silence between us had. And somehow, that silence felt enough. As I stepped into the hallway, the first sounds of the workday beginning echoed in the distance. Papers shuffled, voices murmured, phones rang. The world was back in motion. But I still carried the warmth of her voice from the night before, soft, vulnerable, unguarded, a sound that felt like it would never quite leave me. Weeks slipped by, but something in the rhythm of my days had changed. The office felt different now, the same walls, same routines, but a new current running quietly beneath it all. She and I never spoke about that night again. We didn't need to. The memory lived in the pauses between our words, in the small, unspoken glances we still traded when no one else was looking. She was herself again, poised, decisive, her presence commanding as ever. Yet there was a softness now, a gentler kind of calm that had replaced the old tension she used to wear like armor. When she passed by my desk, she'd sometimes pause to ask how a project was going, or offer a faint, knowing smile that lasted just long enough to remind me that she remembered too. One afternoon, weeks later, she called me into her office. The sun was spilling across her desk in broad, honey-colored light. She was reviewing a proposal, reading glasses balanced on the bridge of her nose, an image so ordinary and yet so quietly beautiful that I forgot to breathe for a second. Without looking up, she said, "You've grown a lot since you started here." "Maybe I've had a good teacher," I said, unable to stop the hint of warmth in my tone. She glanced up at that, one eyebrow lifting in mild amusement. "Flattery still works on me," she murmured. "I wasn't flattering you," I replied softly. "I meant it." Her eyes held mine for a long, suspended moment, no tension, no uncertainty, just mutual understanding. Then she set the paper down, leaned back slightly, and said, "You told me once that I was the smart one." I nodded. "I remember." She smiled, small, genuine, the kind of smile that carried a history behind it. "You were wrong," she said. "Was I?" "Yes," she said, her gaze unwavering. "You were the one paying attention." The words landed with a quiet finality, the kind that doesn't need more explanation. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could do was hold her gaze, feeling that familiar steadiness between us, the kind that existed beyond words or rules or roles. Finally, she looked back at the papers on her desk, her voice calm but laced with warmth. "You proved your point." I smiled faintly. "And what was that?" "That intelligence," she said, glancing up once more, "isn't about knowing everything. It's about knowing when to see someone." The silence that followed felt peaceful, not charged like before, not uncertain, just right. I left her office soon after, the door clicking softly behind me. As I walked down the corridor, I could still hear the faint hum of her voice in my head, that calm assurance, that quiet vulnerability she'd once tried to hide. And in that moment, I realized, some connections don't need declarations or endings. They just exist quietly, like a pulse beneath the noise of everyday life. She didn't have to prove she was smart anymore. She already had. And somewhere in that lesson, she'd taught me something far more valuable, how to see someone without needing to own them.